In July of 1949, the Japanese Transport Authority made an effort to jumpstart the auto industry with the introduction of the K class of vehicle.
1949年7月、運輸省令第36号車両規則第3条第2項が改定され、自動車を分けて軽自動車、小型自動車、普通自動車および特殊自動車の4種とし、その分類は別表で定めるという文言をもって、軽自動車の名称が史上初めて登場した。
And with that, the K class of vehicle was born. At the time, most people couldn't afford a car, so they owned a motorcycle, a motorized bicycle, or a three-wheeled vehicle. But this needed to change for the development of the nation. So with the introduction of the K classification, quite a few manufacturers had a go at trying to make something that people actually wanted to buy. But they all failed. Developing vehicles that matched the road conditions in Japan within the specifications were deemed by many domestic manufacturers as impossible. Despite efforts to make owning a K-car more appealing, such as special K-car licenses which were much easier to get than any other category, and depending on location didn't even require a driving test of any description, the K class of car was actually an overall failure. Mainly because manufacturing costs made the end product too expensive compared to the 2 or 3-wheeled options. The K-class regulations were repeatedly revised and expanded almost every other year until 1954, where they settled into a 360cc engine capacity limit. There were a few attempts to make the new regulations work, but they all failed for the same reason: cost. The Suzuki Suzulite was the first 4-seater K car and actually sold a decent amount, but even that had a hard time with slow sales and durability issues. Here's some fun trivia for you. Believe it or not, it could do 80 terrifying kilometers per hour. You weren't allowed to though, because the speed limit for K vehicles was 40 kilometers an hour, and that shit lasted all the way until the mid-1960s. It wasn't until March of 1958 when somebody finally got the formula right. Rumour has it that they sat 4 people down, built the car around them, and limited the outer dimensions of the car to be as small as possible. One of the designers and test dummies for the build was Shinroku Momose, who was said to be over 180 centimeters tall and had long legs. The car was the Subaru 360. What is this thing? A small VW Beetle? Well, it's actually closer to a Hino Renault 4CV, but they used Mount Akagi as its test track. That's right, it was born on the home course of the Akagi Red Suns from Initial D. That was before the road was even paved properly. This story gets even wilder though, because the Transport Department decided it wanted the test for K certification to be in the middle of winter on a cold day with light snow on Mount Hakone. That's the final toge from Initial D. Now get this, there was supposed to be 2 Transport Department employees on board during the test, but one of them flat out refused to get in because he was afraid. So instead they added 55 kilos of ballast to simulate a person. The car destroyed expectations. The Subaru 360 was a hit, and between 1958 and 1970 sold 392,000 units. Most of us will never get a chance to drive one of these, or many other K cars in real life, because of rising prices, rust, or low production numbers. But lucky for us, the team that made Gan Turismo did their best to make the cars feel as realistic as possible. And with that, we can look at them, drive them, and even compare them. Will it be 100% accurate to real life? Probably not. But if we give each car the crappiest tires available and send it, we will get some idea of what they're like. And at the end of the day, it's just entertainment. This is the Subaru 360. The goal for this, and I quote, charming egg shape, was clear. 4 adults have to fit. It has to be as cheap as possible, it has to be as light as possible, as fast as possible, and handle as good as possible. That's a tall order when you look at what other manufacturers were able to come up with for this price range. Not only was this car one of the first mass-produced vehicles using a full monocoque structure without an independent frame in Japan, they really did go out of their way to make this as light as possible, with the car weighing just 385 kilos at the time of launch. They made the steering wheel as small as possible comfortable without making the steering too heavy. They used minimal gauges, switches, wiring, and even put more thought than most into the seat design, all in a quest to cut weight. Weight cutting was even included in the transmission and driveline. The car had a motorcycle-style fuel tank complete with fuel gauge built into the lid and a fuel cock with a reserve setting. Driving around, there was no way to know for sure when you'd run out of fuel. The engine they chose to use was an east-west mounted 356cc air-cooled 2-cylinder 2-stroke outputting a massive 16 horsepower. A long way from the 64 that K-Spec became, but for its time it was modest, and the power combined with the lightweight design made it pretty zippy. Oh, I forgot to mention they put that engine in the back behind the rear wheels. That's right, it's basically a Porsche. The quoted max speed I found online was 80 kilometers an hour. In-game, without the fear of death on a really steep off-road downhill, I was able to get it as fast as 98 kilometers an hour. On tarmac and snow, that speed was reduced to an absolute peak of 82 before the rev limiter caused the car to jolt back in speed. Around Tsukuba Circuit, the best I could get was 77 kilometers an hour. Everything down to the tyres was thoroughly researched, manufactured and tested specifically for this car. They implemented a 12-volt electrical system while their competitors were still on 6 volts. They basically wanted all the cool things from a full-sized 4-wheel vehicle compacted down to fit the K requirements. Their thinking was that making this more like a full-sized vehicle would attract more customers. They were right. Cars made in later years still didn't sell as well as the Subaru 360. The suspension was so good it was dubbed the Subaru cushion because of its superior ride quality over rough terrain. The one thing they were unable to solve, however, was the difference in ride height for one occupant versus 4. The suspension setup combined with the little wheels and tyres meant that it wasn't uncommon to see 3 people carrying luggage while walking behind the vehicle as it manoeuvred over especially deep ruts. Having said that though, this was common for all 4-wheel vehicles at the time and not just the 360. The Subaru 360 has continued to be a loved Japanese car to this day, and it's very easy to see why. I found the car wonderful to drive in game, especially on dirt, and I racked up a lot of kilometers downhill off-road just throwing the thing sideways. It really does handle very, very well in my opinion, but that shouldn't have been as surprising as it was because it was kind of made for that.